Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And unexpectedly, Brandon Carter replied to the video I did yesterday with his discussions about ketogenic diets. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. I think this can make for some interesting discussion here that everyone can learn from. And quite honestly, I'm not going to go very hard on Brandon. I do pick on a lot of guys in this industry. I don't necessarily think Brandon's a bad guy. Don't know enough about him to make that statement, but I don't necessarily think that he's one of these terrible, evil people in the industry. However, what I'm going to say, Brandon, since you clearly watched these, I want to help you before you get too far into this keto thing, because you're starting to jump on it, you're starting to capitalize on it, you're starting to monetize on it. I'm going to ask you, for the sake of your fans, that you step back and objectively assess this and look at this and go look at all the host of the data on this, not just the pro-ketogenic stuff. And I'm sorry about all that truck noise out there, guys. Not all of the pro-ketogenic stuff, but go look at what the real experts who say, the medical doctors who work with people in the obesity clinics, the registered dietitians who work with people in obesity clinics, all these people, and find out what all these doctors really have to say, the people who really work with diets in the real world. You're going to find the ketogenic diet doesn't give very much support for a good reason. And it's not necessarily safe to be advocating for people to use it. And I'm telling you, as someone who has done these diets myself in the past, it's not new to me. And what I want to break down, the very first study Brandon linked, the very first study, I only looked at a couple of them, and one of them I had to just stop. I knew when he said there's one that showed athletes getting a bunch of muscle, I knew it was going to be Dr. Jacob Wilson. I went just to check the study. First researcher listed, top researcher, Jacob Wilson. Brandon, don't link Dr. Wilson's stuff if you want to be taken seriously. I'm not going to jump into anything further on that. Go do a little digging. You're going to find most people will not accept him as a credible researcher. I've known a lot of experts who say, I don't want to see anything he puts out. All right, he has been accused by more than a few people, more than a few other PhDs, of questionable research methods. Okay, just throwing that out there, not just involving diet. So, that being said, we're not going to jump into that one. There's no need to even do that because it's not going to be accepted very well if you try to link that study to actual experts. So, I want to cover just the first one. He linked a study showing that obese women put on a ketogenic style diet lost 2.2 times as much body fat as women on just a restricted calorie diet. It was still 30% fat. Now keep in mind, 30% fat is not low fat. That's not low fat at all. That's not a low fat diet. Under 20% would be low fat. So keep in mind, that was still a moderate fat diet. So that being said, he said they lost more body fat. Here's the problem. First of all, we're going to jump into what the study actually showed, because it actually had some big negatives too. That, again, this has to do you just accept conclusions or do you look at data and studies? All right, when you're analyzing studies, you don't just jump to the conclusions. You damn well better look at what the data says yourself. Because researchers oftentimes have bias in their own conclusions, and then when they're peer-reviewed, other people say, hey, we don't necessarily agree with your conclusions. That's what happens when meta-analysis later, when 10 or 15 of these studies are looked at. Now, the biggest problem. What's the biggest problem everyone sees with the study? I'll link it below. Self-reported caloric intake. When we're dealing with anything involving weight loss, what is one of the biggest things that researchers look at and say, well, we're going to take this as very weak evidence? When people report and record their own food. Why? Because we have found historically, and this is going to shock people, there have been test subjects who were taught how to weigh, measure, and write their own food logs in studies who, when they were then followed and videoed on camera, were over 2,000 calories off. People say, what? There have been cases, documented cases, where people were tested by researchers just to see, they've done studies just to see how well people can record their own food intake, particularly women. And this is, again, self-reported in study on women. There have been documented cases of women recording their own calories when they weigh everything on a scale and write it down, of being off by over 2,000 calories. I shit you not. Like there actually been a documented case in one of these studies where they looked at it where one of the women said that she was consuming 1,300 calories when she was consuming 3,500, but she was positive she did everything right. See the problem we run into? There's a reason self-reported intake is not held to anywhere near the standard that the metabolic ward is held to. When you put people in a metabolic ward where the dietitians and their assistants and everyone weigh out and hand you all of your food or everything that you eat, they weigh it first. They measure everything. They monitor you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't have any time by yourself to slip in a secret snack. People on ketogenic diets do not lose more body fat than other diets, and usually they lose a tiny little bit less. They lose a little less when calories and protein are equal. So carbohydrates actually have a slight metabolic advantage. Okay, they also preserve muscle better. The people on the ketogenic diets usually lose a little bit more muscle. Now, in this case, the ketogenic diet group lost more weight and more fat, even though they said they reported roughly equal intakes. See the problem there? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't happen that way when we put them in a metabolic ward. When other people weigh their food out and measure their food, that doesn't happen. You have one study there, the self-reported intake. Self-reported intake. The thing is, the reason ketogenic diets are popular, why? They suppress appetite. They are actually inferior for fat loss on a calorie per calorie basis. That is generally accepted. The metabolic ward studies show that. They're inferior. For many people, they are superior at suppressing appetite. In other words, you can only stand to eat so many steaks, eggs, fatty cuts of meat, bacon, and green vegetables before you start getting tired of eating it. People's calories tend to go down over time on true ketogenic diets because they just don't like the food starts to get less palatable over time. Lack of food variety makes you eat less. Ketones themselves can blunt appetite through a mild nausea. Self-reported intake on these keto diets, they oftentimes aren't weighing it right. And you'll see a lot of cases of when people do ketogenic diets, they'll get the calories off because they're not weighing all the fat they lose. In other words, they might throw a bunch of hamburger meat on a foreman grill and they lose 500 calories of it through the fat dripping off. They didn't weigh the fat that they wasted. Maybe they only took the raw measurements. That's one of the big ways in which they misaccount. Big ways they misaccount for it. They end up eating less than they think they are. But that's kind of the point. These diets suppress appetite for a good chunk of people. But the thing is, you take a study like that, it's self-reported, there's no way their calories were equal. Because they didn't just lose more fat, they lost more muscle. Now, that's the interesting part. Are we really, in the fitness world, are we really going to take a study that shows very significant muscle loss? Is a good weight loss? That's a good fat loss diet. They lost 7 pounds of muscle. Brandon or anybody who looked at this study, did you guys look at everything? All right. Out of these obese women, now normally when you're obese, it's really easy to retain muscle. Everyone knows that, right? The fatter you are, the easier it is to hold on to muscle when you cut. The leaner you get, the more difficult muscle retention becomes. This is understood. This has been studied. In fact, ketogenic diets don't have enough protein in them to retain muscle mass for most people who live seriously. When you get about to that 10 or 11% body fat mark and you start going lower than that on a ketogenic diet, you start shedding muscle like crazy. Again, without steroids, that's been noted. Experts have noted this with their clients. So, that being said, what did they lose? All right, these women over a 6-month period of time on the ketogenic diet lost 8.5 kilograms. That's about 20 pounds. 20 pounds lost in 6 months for obese people. That's okay. It's not particularly good, but it's okay. And they lost more body fat also than the other group. They lost 4.8 kilograms of body fat. Anyone doing the math yet? It's about 10 pounds. It's just a hair under 10 pounds, actually. It's under 10 pounds, but it's close, like 9 point something. Now, we're going to look at a diet and say, obese women running a diet for 6 months lose 10 pounds of fat. 10 pounds lost in 6 months? Damn. They weren't very obese then. They were probably still obese at the end of the study. So they run this diet for 6 months. These obese women are probably still obese if they only lost 10 pounds of fat. 6 months. 6 damn months of dieting to lose 10 pounds of fat. I'm not impressed. Well, here's the problem. What's the difference there? 8.5, 4.9. I think that's about 3.7 kilos. Anyone done the math on that? They lost 3.7 kilos that wasn't fat. That's 8 pounds, 8.1 pounds. They lost 8 pounds of lean mass. Are we really going to promote a diet for drug-free people to lose fat on and get jacked, where these women who ran it lost 8 pounds of lean mass? How many pounds of that lean mass was muscle? 4 pounds, 5 pounds, 6 pounds? I bet you it's at least half. I bet you it's at least half. At least 4 pounds, 5 pounds. So these women lost 5 pounds of muscle mass. We're going to take a diet and tell people, oh, you can get ripped on this diet. These fat women only lost 5 pounds of muscle doing it. This is really what we're going to prop up for the fitness world. A diet that made fat women lose 5 pounds of muscle, and it took them 6 whole months to lose 10 pounds of fat. Come on. The next study was, of course, done on diabetic people. And the problem is it said it measured insulin sensitivity, but they only took their fasting glucose. How do you measure insulin sensitivity of people in ketosis from fasted glucose? You can't. You've got to give them carbs to test their insulin sensitivity. When we do studies where we give people carbs who've been on ketogenic diets, oftentimes their insulin sensitivity gets worse. As far as diabetes goes, we have plenty of documented cases of medical doctors prescribing the exact opposite type of diet and curing type 2 diabetes. It is an accepted cure for milder forms of type 2 diabetes for people to run high starch diets to where they eat almost no saturated fat and they don't eat any processed sugar, but they eat a bunch of carbs, a bunch of starches, pasta, potatoes, rice, to completely cure their type 2 diabetes. That's one of the diets that's actually been proven to remove type 2 diabetes. But, you know, we're going to use type 2 diabetics in another study to come up with what sort of diet we should use for healthy people. Using a diet that suppresses diabetic symptoms, but they return immediately as soon as you start eating carbs again. You really want people to follow a ketogenic diet forever? See, here's the problem. Type 2 diabetics can't do carb cycling or cyclic ketogenic diets if they're trying to use it for their diabetes. It messes them up. They have to just stay in ketosis. And really, do that for a lifelong practice. There is no medical doctor or registered dietitian on earth that would ever prescribe a ketogenic diet as a lifelong thing. And that's the problem with type 2 diabetics who go on that type of diet. It doesn't cure their disease, it blunts the symptoms. Again, absurdity in these studies. Oh, about to sneeze. So what I would ask here, Brandon, you're probably going to see this just like you saw the last one. I want you to really step back and I want to ask the question. I'm telling you, look at these studies. You reported a terrible study of self-reported data that showed a bunch of muscle loss to prop up your diet. That was the very first study you linked. I want you to step back and say, am I going to be a con man? Or am I going to be honest and really try to find the truth in this situation? Or am I just going to con people to sell stuff for money? You need to decide what you want to do, brother. What sort of person you want to be. Because if you go look at all the Metabolic Ward studies, go look at the big paper that Brad Schoenfeld and others just released from all of their personal training stuff, and he is a researcher with a PhD, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, showing the different diets and the different stuff in the Metabolic Ward. Go look at all of that and step back and look at what all the clinicians really say about these diets, not just the pro-ketogenic people. What the total sum of the scientific and dietitian and dietetics community says about it before you start pimping this to make money off of. Because you need to understand, if you're pimping it to make money off of, medical doctors and registered dietitians say not to do this diet. It's one of the most extreme diets in the world, not to do it outside of the care of a medical doctor. You're selling books on it. You might want to think that through real carefully, because if someone dies on your diet, that little situation you got into in Austin isn't shit. Somebody dies on your prescribed ketogenic diet when you know that medical doctors say not to do this diet without a prescription from a doctor and blood work every week. You're going to be in a world of shit. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.